We are going to discuss about the Chapter 2 in this. We are going to talk about an example, take an example from one source underscore EMP table and load it into STG underscore EMP table. To do one program in Informatica of ETL process, we will discuss about the Informatica design process. That we discuss about the client products, the source analyzer, warehouse designer, transformations, source qualifier transformation, expression transformations in the Chapter 2. Before we review, we will go to review the Chapter 1. We discussed about introduction of Informatica. Informatica is a company name. It has different ETL products called Power Center, Power Smart, and Power Center RT. The current version of Informatica in the market is version 8, but our training will be on version 7 of Power Center. Then we discussed about the different components of Informatica by looking at the architecture of Informatica. Informatica has two. One is server software and client software. In the server, they have two servers called the repository server and Informatica server. Whenever you install the server component, you need a relational database like Oracle or Sybase, where it will store its system tables, which we call it as a repository. From the client component, you have administrator for administration purpose, repository manager, through which you will create the username, passwords, folder names, privileges. From a ETL developer perspective, you will use the client tools called a designer, workflow manager, and workflow monitor. In the designer, you will develop the ETL program in a GUI base. In the workflow manager, you will execute that program, and in the workflow monitor, you monitor it. So in the designer tool, you develop the ETL program, which they call it as a mapping, which will be stored in the repository, communicated to the repository server to execute that mapping. Then from the client tool called workflow manager, you will create a session, assign the properties for that session. Then to execute that session, you will create a workflow. In the workflow manager, all this information will be stored in the repository through the repository server. And when you say execute, then Informatica server takes the information from the repository, goes to the source as per your program, gets the data, and in the Informatica server, transformation of data takes place and it loads to the target. So while loading the data into the whole process of ETL done by the Informatica server, it is written into a file called a session log file. In the workflow monitor, you can monitor the loading process, and also you can access the session log file. Success or failure, Informatica will create a log file. Then to configure the Informatica client, you have to add the repository, then access the repository through the username, password, and the host name. Host name is the repository server information, and you give the port number. One time, if you access it, you don't need to give the host name and the port number. Only you have to give the username, password, which we have provided to you. Then, regarding the database setup, we have created three databases. One is called SRC database, the other is called STG database, then the TGT database. Three databases on Oracle database server. In Oracle server, we created three databases. So we have taken the process of the whole ETL in this project, in this training program, you will extract the data from the source and load staging. And again, from staging database, you extract, transform, and load the data into your dimensions and fact tables which are in the TGT database. To access those databases also, we have already provided with you the usernames, passwords, and the connect string. So this is what we have discussed. Now we are going to discuss about Chapter 2 of Informatica. In this chapter, we are going to discuss with an example of extracting the data from source EMP to STG EMP, Informatica design process, source analyzer without design and transformation, source qualifier, expression transformations. The first example which we are going to discuss is, I want to extract the data from a table called source underscore EMP table and load the data into a table called STG underscore EMP. So, if you have written a PLSQL stored procedure, traditional programming, how you would have written program? You would have declared the variables, you would have declared a cursor, selecting the data from source underscore EMP table, then calculating total salary, which is salary plus commission, because you want to load the data into STG EMP table, which needs employee ID, employee name, and total salary. The data coming from the source underscore EMP table has the employee number, e-name, salary, and commission, sal and commission. But for each employee, we need to calculate salary plus commission. So you need to insert into the table the total salary. And after you load the data, you commit it. So this is a traditional programming where you declare the variables, declare the cursor, and you loop through, fetch, insert, and commit. What are we doing here? We are extracting the data from source EMP table, transforming the data, that is calculating. Here the calculation is transformation, salary plus commission, and inserting into stage underscore EMP table of each employee's total salary. After you load the data, you commit it. So basically, you are extracting the data, transforming the data, loading the data. After you load the data into the tables, you need to commit it, so you committed the data. This is in a traditional programming of PLSQL stored procedures. Or PLSQL program, you can SQL program, you can call it as. Even if you write a C program or any program, you have to declare variables, begin, loop through, and end. The same logic, same requirement, how we will do it in Informatica tool. This is the requirement, the specification. In a project, when you go, they'll give you the specification document, the purpose of the program mapping, they call it as source, target, and transformations. We will discuss step by step. This is my requirement. They provide you a specification document, a sample, the way in projects they do. So we have done in this training program, source underscore EMP table, and load the data into STG underscore EMP table. Employee number of the source to the employee number of stage, and e-name to e-name, but we need to calculate salary plus commission to be loaded into total salary. So this is the requirement of the program or the mapping specifications or ETL specification. Now, let us come to the design process of Informatica. Before we go to the design process, let me come up with the discussion execution of the Informatica tool, again, Informatica product. We have two servers. One is called the repository server. The other is called the Informatica server. And it needs a relational database, which we call it as the repository, where Informatica stores its system tables. Then there are 4 client tools. One is called the repository manager, sorry. The other is designer. Then the workflow manager. Then workflow monitor. So all these are communicating through the repository server, and this is communicating to the repository. Informatica server also communicates. This is to and fro communication. Here also it is to and fro. So in Informatica, whatever program you write, the whole ETL programming, which is in a GUI base, you will write it in the designer tool. Using the designer tool, these 4 tools are called the client tools. These 4 are called the client tools. So you have designer, workflow manager, workflow monitor, and repository manager. This repository manager is used for administration. Designer is used for developing the ETL programming in GUI base. Then this tool is used for execution of the program if you are looking from a traditional programming. Execution of the GUI program, which is developed in the designer tool while the process is going on, which is done by the Informatica server. This is the power of Informatica, which based on your ETL program, whatever you have written in the GUI base, it will be stored in this repository. You say execute that program, that also goes to the repository. Then when you say execution, then Informatica server picks that information, that program, connects to the source, and extracts the data, gets the data into the Informatica server, transforms the data. Here is the data transformation. Takes place in the Informatica server. Then it will load the data into the target. Means the actual process of loading the physical data will be done by the Informatica server. While loading the data, that information is also stored in the repository. You can watch it from you can access it from the workflow monitor, how the data loading is taking place. And every load, Informatica server will write while processing. It will write a session log file, which tells what exactly is happening, success, failure, or anything. It will be written in this log file, which can be monitored, which can be accessed by this any errors, anything. So this is the overall flow of Informatica architecture. Now we want to develop the program using the designer tool. Then the steps, the complete process of ETL steps is add a repository. In the previous chapter, we have shown you how to add a repository in the designer tool. Then after you add the repository, then the ETL process, that is, you define the source structure, you define the target, then you create a mapping. So then the fifth step is to load the data. So this is the process of design in Informatica. So now the next step in this is we'll go through that, taking the traditional program, the specification which we have got, that is extract the data from source EMP table and load the data into HTTP EMP table. We'll be discussing that now. Already you have added the repository. Then we are going to discuss about the designer tool. Designer tool contains different components. Like source analyzer or the source, warehouse designer or the target, transformation developer or transformations, maplet designer or maplet, mapping designer or mapping. So in the designer tool, you have this, when you access the designer tool, where you develop the ETL program. So when you access the designer tool, under your folder, for your name, there are different components in the designer tool. So have the business components, source, target, dimension, transformation, maplets, and mapping. For the ETL developer role, you don't need the cube, dimension, and the business components. We will be working on target, transformation, maplets, mapping, designer. The look and feel of the tool. This is your navigator window, the workspace, and the output window. So, source, or you can access these components by clicking on these buttons. Source analyzer, whatever you define under this source analyzer, it will be your sources. And the next is warehouse designer or target. Whatever you define under this become your target. Third one is transformation developer. This is reuse components, later part of the training. Maplet designer, later part of the training. Components, and you create the mapping. So source or source analyzer, warehouse or target, warehouse designer or target, or mapping designer, last one. Whatever you define your source, for ETL process, you need to find the target, and you define the transformation. The whole thing is called as a mapping. First step in the design process. After you add the repository, the second step, define the source. Whatever you define it, you define as the source analyzer. Then the warehouse designer, whatever will be the target, warehouse designer, and the mapping designer. If you want to see, you are not able to see buttons, then go to the tool. Also show you up, you click on them. There also you can navigate. these buttons are from so this span is called the navigator window workspace, and this is the output, and this is the toolbar of your Informatica PowerShell Designer toolbar. So it contains 8 components, but we'll be discussing source, target, transformation, applets, and mappings. So the sources or source analyzer, you input or create a source definition. Your source can be a flat file, a XML file, a COBOL file, or a ERP or relational sources. You can define your target, that is under the warehouse designer. You can define it or you can import it. How to create, how to import, we will now. Transformation developer to create reusable transformations, maplets to create the maplets, mappings to create the mappings in mapping. So this is the source analyzer where you define the source. We have discussed just now. Then what is this source analyzer with? Whenever your source is a table or a flat file as per previous document, as per requirement, but source can be a table, your source flat file, your source a COBOL file, your source Linux, somewhere that's the data. In our specification document, it is source underscore EMP table. That is your source. So first you need to define the structure. You need to define the structure of your source. Defining the structure of your source, the component called the source analyzer. When you define the structure and save it through the repository server, it will go and connect to the repository and save the structure of your source in Informatica. So first step, we will create manually the structure. So, but please remember, the structure of your source will be stored in the repository as a definition. Source will not contain data, only the structure, and whichever table you want to use as a source for your extraction. First we have to define the source. We define it in the analyzer. So first step, define the source as per your ETL specification document or the example. Your source table name is source underscore EMP, and the columns are employee number, EMP number, ename, sal, and commission. Like your traditional programming, where you define the structure by declare variables same way, but it will be faster and faster. Define the structure and its columns. So we are going to define it. The source analyzer. How to define it? Please observe. Sources would be in the source analyzer. Go to sources, and there are different ways of defining the structure. Defining the structure of your. We will create the structure ourselves. That is called create manually. So you click on the button create. Here you will define the name of the source. Source name is source underscore EMC. What will be your database? It is an Oracle database. So you have to name it Oracle or any name. The database name is Oracle. And database type. Here you can define the structure of the source for any type of relational database or flat file. So for us it is Oracle. You say create. Done. Now you will define the columns or the fields of the source underscore EMP table. Now as per your ETL specification document, what is your source? Source underscore EMP, employee number, ename, sal, commission. So we will define the structure. Double click. You will have different tabs, table, columns, metadata extension, table. Here you can write the owner name, you can describe it, you can rename it, then you go to the columns. Here is the button to add the columns, fields of your source structure. Please be careful, you have to be the same name as per your ETL specification document. it is EMP number. So EMP number, data type, different data types it supports. For us it is number. You can make it not null or primary key or foreign key also. We don't focus on that now. Then key name, back add to 50, then add another column called sal, number PS, precision and scale, and another column called commission, number PS, T not 10, it's fine. So these are the source structure. You are defining the structure of the source. Then I say okay. You defined the structure, not the data, please. Now, please observe here, repository save. Now I am saving the structure under this folder. So the structure will go and save in the repository. Under the repository, for that folder, is the source inserted. Structure has been inserted into the repository of Informatica. So, as per this architecture, you defined the structure in the designer tool, goes to the repository server and saves in the repository. The structure, not the data, please. I will create once again the source structure. Sources, create. I will give a name, source underscore EMP. I cannot give the same name, so I give a different name. Database name, database type. I say create. Now double click. You can give the description of this here, and you can create the columns. Add the columns employee number, and it will support different data types. You can select it. For me it is number. Next, rename varchar to 50, sal, then it is number PS, commission, number PS. So employee number, rename sal commission, varchar to 50, then you say OK. Then repository save. Please observe once again, when you save the work, it goes and saves in the folder. For that repository, all this information is stored in a relational database of the repository. So whenever you define the whole ETL process definition, the program will be done in the designer tool. Under the source analyzer, you define the structure of your source from where you are going to extract that table structure, table flat file COBOL or XML file. First you define the structure. So we define the structure as per our requirement of extracting the data from source underscore EMP table and load the data into stg underscore EMP table. Then we need to define the, as per my ETL specification, I need to define the target, that is stg underscore EMP. So I will define the target. How to define the target? In Informatica, wherever you are going to load the data, that structure has to be defined. It is in the warehouse designer. Whatever you define under the source will be under the source analyzer. Whatever you want to load into which target table you define under the warehouse designer. Source is observed in the navigator window. Whatever you have defined the source structures, you can see it here. If you want to remove it, clear it from this screen, say right click and clear all. Do not delete those things. If you delete it, it will be deleted. So if you want to see again the structure, you drag and drop under the source analyzer. If you want to clear it, right click and say clear all, clear from this workspace. You want to see the structure? Again, you drag and drop and clear all. So now I want to define the structure in the warehouse designer. The purpose of warehouse designer is to define the structure of your target. So how you define it? Your target, structure can be created manually, or your target can be a flat file, or you can import it from a database file, you can create automatically. So there are different ways of defining the target structure. Whenever you define it and you save it through the repository server, that structure will be saved in the repository of Informatica. So to create the definition, you can create manually, automatic, or import from a database. One way is we will create the structure manually. Create a structure of target manually. You use the warehouse designer that take the option to define the structure manually. So what is the structure of your target? STG_EMP table, employee EMP number, e-name, and the total salary. So how to define it? Go to the warehouse designer, target, create. Same way how you define the source, find the structure of the target, give the name. What is the name of it? STG_EMP. What type of database it is? It is Oracle. Create. Done. Double click. Same table, column, index, metadata extension. Any constraints, any options, description. We don't need all this much. Columns to add. EMP number is my target. Column name, e-name, then total salary, number PS. You say OK. So this is your structure of your target table of STG_EMP table. Now repository, save. So it has saved the target structure, the repository. So this is how you define the structure of your target using the warehouse designer. So define the ETL process, you need to define the structure of your source, define the structure of your target. I will do once again, target, create, then you say STG_EMP _1, create. Now under this columns, employee number, EMP number, numbers, e-name, and the total salary, number PS, set OK. Now repository, save. So we have defined the structure of the source and defined the structure of the target. Clear from here, you say, clear all. I've saved the work. So what we did, as per our ETL specification document, to extract the data from source_EMP table and load the data into STG_EMP table, we defined the structure, source, and the target. But we need to create the total salary. We have to calculate the total salary, that is salary plus commission. So this is how you define the structure and you define the column names of your target definition. So after you define the source and the target definitions, now we need to create the mapping. Mapping is nothing but the whole ETL program, which you write it in a GUI based in Informatica. They call that as a mapping. Mapping is nothing but the flow of data from the source to target, or it is a combination of source, target, and transformation. Basically, you write it in the mapping that extract, read the data from the source, transform this data, and load the data into the target, the program, the definition, which will be picked up by the Informatica server at runtime. Means in this, using this designer tool, you have defined the source, you define the target that is stored in the repository. Now you define the whole program, which they call it as a mapping. That is source, what are the transformations, where to load the data. All this will be stored in the repository as per your mapping. Informatica server picks the data, transforms the data, and loads the data into the target. So in this mapping, you have source, target, and transformations. And transformations are nothing but objects in a mapping that move or change the data. Means it will modify the data. It will tools like concatenate, restrict the data, filter the data, do the calculations, conversion of data, or transforming. That is called the transforming of data between the source and the target. Source will extract, transformations will transform, and load the data into the target. This whole thing is called as a mapping. It is nothing but a simple graphical user interface. So using this, where you will fill this complete mapping or the complete ETL program, you have defined the source in the source analyzer, you define the target in the warehouse designer. Now you will define the whole ETL program in the GUI based in the mapping designer. Mapping is nothing but a data flow from source to target, which includes if they have transformation objects. That basically in the mapping you say to read, that is extract, transform, and load the data, and actual process will be done by the Informatica server on the data. So using the mapping designer, we will do the mapping. Before we go to the mapping, we will discuss about the transformations. Transformations are nothing but objects in a mapping. That is to transform the data, to modify the data, to change the data between the source and the target. For that purpose, we use transformations. Here, data moves from the source to target. So in between, you have these transformations. These are all transformations which modify the data, which change the data. From the source, you will extract it. Here you do the transforming of data as per your requirement, and this is your target. So in this target, you load the data. So transformation is an object which Informatica provides you to modify the data, change the data, to move the data from the source to the targets. Informatica Designer provides you with a set of transformations that perform specific functions. Example, different, like a toolbar, toolkit, or from a mechanical perspective, a toolkit which contains different types of screwdrivers, different types of spanners, different types of hammers. So for each particular specific function, you will use a specific screwdrivers, specific spanners. Same way, in the Informatica for transformation, it provides different objects for transforming the data. Source qualifier transformation is used to extract the data when your source is a table or a flat file. Or your source is a relational or a flat file, you use source qualifier. To extract the data when your source is a COBOL or a VSAM file, you use a normalizer. You want to do simple calculations, then you use expression. To restrict the data, to filter the data, then you use filter transformation. Aggregator transformation is used to aggregate the data, rank the data. Update strategy transformation is used to send, insert, update, delete, or reject operations. on the data, looks up for values, stored procedure, to execute the stored procedure from Informatica, the router, to filter the data, to restrict the data, to load the data into multiple targets when you use the router transformation, sequence generator, that is for our surrogate keys, sequentially generated numbers, joiner, when your sources are two tables or a table and a flat file or two flat files, then you use a joiner. Sorter is used when you want to order by. Application source qualifier, when your source is application like SAP systems, Oracle applications. Well, if your source is an XML, then you use XML source qualifier. If your source is MQ series is a product of IBM, so you use MQ series source qualifier. So these are the different transformations, objects which Informatica provides you. We will discuss each one whenever required in our So the transformations are the objects to perform different transformations of data. So first transformation we are going to discuss now is source qualifier transformation. As per our ETL specification document, we need to get the data from the source EMP table and transform the salary plus commission and load the data into STG_EM table. We have defined the source, we defined the target. Now to complete that ETL program called as a mapping, so to create the mapping, the designer tool, we go to the mapping designer and create a mapping. How to create a mapping? Go to the toolbar, have the mapping. So whenever you click on Source Analyzer, observe the toolbar change. For warehouse designer, as per the warehouse designer, the toolbar changes. Mapping designer, it will change to the mapping toolbar. So to create a mapping, say mapping, create, and you give the name. The naming convention which is followed when you create a mapping is M_, the target table. Generally, so the target table name is STG_EMP. So this is an example. So I say EXE_STG_EMP. This is your mapping name. So when you do the lab, please follow the naming convention M_EX_EMP. Where can you find in your document? The ETL specification document. They have already defined it. They have already given the name as mapping name as M_EX_STG_EMP. So you name the mapping. Now you need to extract the data from the source EMP. So you go to the source component, select the source, drag and drop. So as soon as you drag a source, if it is a relational table or a flat file, automatically a transformation called the source qualifier will come. This is based on the option settings which is already set in the tool, that whenever you drag your source, it is a table or a flat file, you will get a source qualifier transformation. So, what is the importance of the source qualifier? The purpose of the source qualifier transformation is it is mandatory in a mapping to have a table, a relational, or a flat file. Whenever your source is a relational or a flat file, you should use source qualifier transformation. It is the transformation in which it will write the select statement if it is a table, because to extract the data from a relational table, you need to write a select statement to extract the data. Even if you go to the traditional programming which we were discussing, also you will extract the data from the EMP table, because you need that data at runtime. Means when you execute that program, it will be getting the data from that table. To get the data from a table, you write a select statement. So extraction from a table can be done by writing only the select statement. So in Informatica, you will write that select statement in the source qualifier transformation.